What's good? This is your boy Tico, Tren, SYSBM. And today's subscriber request topic is going to be this is 6 of 7, is going to be about Sigmas versus Alphas. Sigmas win is the title. This is basically going to break down various things about Sigma males. It's going to talk about if Sigma males exist, to what makes them great, things along the lines of that for the most part. Mainly, do they actually exist and how they actually exist and why they exist for the most part. And their existence basically is what makes them great, because they pretty much don't really participate in a hierarchy unless it benefits them for all intents purposes. Then they'll participate. But usually it's either to like overthrow somebody or throw somebody off their throne, or and take over. Basically, no, they don't even really take over. They just throw somebody off their throne and they keep it moving for the most part, and somebody else has to step up into that person's place. That's typically how that works for all intents and purposes. Because the sad part about that, what a lot of people don't realize about Sigma males is, yes, they actually do exist, and two, they basically they basically work on a they work on their own terms and in their they're basically in their own they're off on their own for all intents and purposes. These would typically be your people got to roll into town, don't like to follow rules, break. I mean, they follow rules as much as humanly possible, but they tend to break a lot of them or bend a lot of them, or sometimes shit doesn't really apply to them type things, which is typically their thing. That's pretty much their bag for all intents and purposes. So when you actually get to see a Sigma in action, it's actually pretty nice, and it's actually a very rewarding thing to get to see in a Sigma in action for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to Sigmas are very good at what they do for two reasons. One, they do it outside of the hierarchy, and two, they tend to make things work for themselves for all intents and purposes. So what they basically do is they typically work outside the construct, or the outside the a structure for the most part, and they actually work their way up the structure outside the structure. Or typically it would be like, typically everybody else would take the stairs or the elevator. They would typically be the ones scaling the building or coming in like SWAT or some shit like that from the side of a building. For all intents and purposes, would be the best way to describe it. However, the neat thing about Sigmas that separates them from alphas is their ability to always want to learn, their ability to always for self awareness, their ability for self improvement, their ability to never stop learning and always keep an open mind and always think outside the box in all technicality. So what happens with that is the fact that they never stop learning, they never stop improving themselves, and they never stop with progressing in their lives, no matter how it is. Let it be good, let it be workout, let it be learning, let it be physical, let it be all this other stuff for all intents and purposes. What's up, MGTOW Life? Um, so when you actually, so the neat thing about Sigmas in this light is the thing that I love about Sigmas versus Alphas. Alphas, let's put it this way: Alphas are the type of people who get arrested for the RICO Act. Those are the type of people you see getting arrested for RICO Act in the mafia. Um, they tend to get arrested and they get dethroned and they get replaced for all intents purposes. That's typically how that works. When in fact Sigmas are like your Genoveses, they'll play stupid or act like they're crazy just so they can avoid jail, basically. Or they're basically very enigmatic, basically, so they never go to jail and they never spend time in jail at all. Like Genovese, or other mob bosses like him that never spun time in jail. And alphas tend to be your people like John Gotti, or people along the lines of that for the most part tend to be your alpha males. The sad part about alpha males is alpha males only have a shelf life, where sigmas don't have a shelf life. Sigmas basically adapt to their environment continuously by continuously learning picking up new skills, and and adding them to their arsenal for all intents purposes. Whereas alphas, they basically think they know everything, and they don't really need to learn too much anything else, and everybody else pretty much caters to them and caters to their whims. So there's no need to improve yourself if you think you're perfect any damn way. It's typically how it works. What's up, Sigma? But typically, how Sigmas actually operate and alphas actually operate is they have this uncanny. Sigmas have this uncanny ability to. They have this uncanny ability to actually, like I said, learn and continuously learn and spot check their learning for the most part. Whereas alphas, they tend to like think they know everything, so they don't need to do anything, and they're always gonna be where they are. The problem with being an alpha is there's always another person that's willing to dethrone you from your spot. Whereas as a Sigma, you don't have to worry about nobody dethroning you because you're not sitting on the throne at all. You don't have to worry about being in charge or being worried about somebody, you know, trying to take your top spot because you're not sitting there. It's pretty much vacant as far as you're concerned. And that's typically how that works. And what a lot of people fail to realize about when it comes to Sigmas is we don't participate in the hierarchy unless we have to participate in the hierarchy. That's typically how it works. Oh wow. Wow. So you have a good one, MGTOW life. But typically how it works with Sigmas is they typically have they're always building on top of themselves, and they're always trying to make themselves better no matter what. And the sad part about a Sigma, unlike an alpha, is an alpha basically works off of all his strengths. So and the sad part about an alpha is his strengths are his weakness for all intents and purposes, because at the end of the day, because when you rely on something so much, you tend to learn very quickly that you know there's only but so long you can actually hold this power or this sway over people before you actually get physically taken for the most part, or surpassed or dominated for all intents and purposes. And this is where typically alphas actually fuck up, because alphas basically walk around like they're the big dick on campus until a person with a bigger dick on campus basically shows the fuck up. Or alphas walk around big and bad up until another alpha shows up big and bad and takes him out of his spot. So the neat thing about an alpha's enemy is basically an alpha's enemy is another alpha. That's typically how that works. So anytime an alpha is being dethroned, he's being dethroned by another alpha. Or every now and again, you'll see in the animal kingdom where two betas overthrow an alpha. I've actually seen that happen before, where two lion brothers actually overthrew the actual alpha male for all intents and purposes, and they became the alpha men in a pride. And that's typically how that works, because I've actually seen that happen where two beta lions basically overthrew the one dominant alpha male, and they basically both became the alpha of the prides for the most part, and they were brothers. And that's typically how that works. So a alpha always forces their dominance, which is actually very true with what Sigma said. However, however, the problem with enforcing your dominance is there's only but so much time that people are going to be scared. When you force your dominance, you basically wound people up to the point where everything's so tight, it's eventually going to unravel, and people are either going to freak out or go crazy or get scared, or you're going to back them into the corner to the point where they're going to come out fighting like a raccoon. And typically that's where a lot of alphas tend to fall or fail at for the most part, because there's always going to be that person that's going to knock you off your game. There's always going to be that person that's smarter than you, that's going to make you feel stupid about yourself. The neat thing about alphas is, because alphas are so used to enforcing dominance, if you mentally beat an alpha, he'll feel some type of way about himself. He'll feel conflicted because you just beat him mentally, and he's used to like enforcing himself physically on people, which is actually pretty funny. And that's the problem with a lot of the alphas. They tend to posture, and they tend to always want to physically intimidate people, But the minute somebody comes up smarter than them and outsmarts them, they feel very small, and then they want to bully that person because that's the only way they know how to beat that person is by bullying that person or beating up that person or kicking them out. Is pretty much how it works. The neat thing about Sigma is a Sigma doesn't have to worry about anybody throwing him off his his uh his his throwing him off his throne because he's not taking the throne. He just basically looks at it and says, "That's not for me. I'd rather move on." Or if a Sigma does take over a lead position, what he typically does is he'll get everybody up to speed on what they need to do, and he'll probably take on an understudy so he can pretty much bring them into the position that he's sitting in. And or what he'll do is get everybody up to speed, and he'll put somebody under him that can manage everything, and he basically is hands off, and he basically manages everything in a hands off type of way. Whereas a Sigma, they're hands on, they got to be in part of everything, and they got to be in everything, and they got to make decisions on everything. Whereas a Sigma, he basically puts everybody that can make proper decisions in his absence for the most part. So typically, a Sigma basically wants his employees, if he is a boss, to work independently without him. Is in all technicalities how it works. So you'll see a lot of Sigma men. They'll basically be supervisors, but they won't micromanage as much as an Alpha will. They'll basically just sit back and let pretty much everybody regulate themselves and handle themselves, and then move on, and then get a person in charge of them guys so they could basically handle all that stuff. And he basically turns around and turns to him when he needs a signature or when they need a signing off for the company for Tim signing off of important paperwork for the company. Then he'll eventually turn to the Sigma so he can fill out the paperwork. That's typically how that works. So a Sigma never has to worry about being overthrown because or challenged for the fact that a Sigma's worst enemy is a self. A Sigma's worst a Sigma's worst adversary is a self, whereas an Alpha's worst adversary is a Sigma or another Alpha, or two Betas ready to team up on his ass. That's typically how that works. And the funny thing about that is people fail to realize this shit when they actually want to go and say, well, Alphas is this, Alphas is that. The problem with Alphas is an Alpha is always overthrown by a Sigma, two Betas, or another Alpha. That's typically how it works. So the sad part about that, an Alpha's worst enemy is a Sigma, an Alpha, or two Betas trying to overthrow him and take his spot. It's typically how it works. And the sad part about that, when it comes to an Alpha being in charge, his spot is always in jeopardy, or his actual top spot is always in threat of being, taken. Whereas if a Sigma's in charge, nobody actually ever goes after that. Nobody ever really goes after the Sigma. And everybody pretty much stays in line and, follows structure for the most part when they're under a Sigma. Whereas an Alpha, you're always going to have that wise ass under him. You're always going to have that one that wants his spot. You're always going to have them people that basically want to dethrone the Alpha for the most part, or think they could do a better job than an Alpha. It's typically how that works. Whereas for Sigmas, people tend to follow Sigmas, but nobody wants to overthrow the Sigma. Everybody tends to always want to follow the Sigma, or they have respect for the Sigma, or they want to learn the Sigma or figure out who the Sigma is and what makes the Sigma tick. That's typically how it works when it comes to Sigmas. When it comes to Alphas, on the other hand, you pretty much know what makes them tick. You pretty much know how they work, and are pretty much an open and shut book for all intents purposes. And that's typically how Alphas are. They're pretty much an open and shut book, whereas a Sigma is almost like layers and layers and layers, a complex layer, just complex layers of who that person actually is, which actually makes him who he is. And the sad part about that is there's a high chance that you're not going to be able to beat a Sigma in a mental joust. Whereas you could beat an Alpha in a mental joust, there's a higher likelihood that you could beat an Alpha in a mental joust. The neat thing about that is, yeah, they definitely do. They'll take control on a temporary basis, or if they do take control, they basically don't micromanage and they sit back and let everybody pretty much handle shit themselves until they can actually put somebody else in this position that they're sitting in. If they can't put anybody in the position that they're sitting in, then we'll basically find somebody that basically can handle they'll eventually find a bunch of people that can handle their jobs and work independently without them. It's typically how that works. But typically, they would like to get in and out as fast as humanly possible if they're going to be in charge. They would like to find somebody and place them in that position and keep it moving for all intents and purposes. But there's times when a Sigma basically has to be in charge, and he tends to find people who can actually do the jobs themselves. That way, he never has to actually do any actual work to actually micromanage Sigmas. To micromanage everybody under them. So they basically all know their roles. They all do their roles perfectly, and it works like a well-oiled machine for all intents and purposes without having to be micromanaged like it would if he was an alpha male. Because usually alpha males employ anybody and everybody. So now he has to micromanage anybody and everybody because he doesn't hire anybody and everybody off the street for the most part that can do the job, that can't do the job, that may be able to do the job. So now he has to micromanage and make sure everything works. Whereas a Sigma hires people who can manage themselves and can work independently and work as a team to basically work out any problems without needing him in the process. That's typically how that works. And it is what it is when it comes down to it. And the neat thing about it is a lot of people will say Sigmas don't exist or Sigmas are nothing more than betas. No, Sigmas actually do exist. The thing about Sigmas and Alphas is, like I was saying, when it comes down to mob bosses, John Gotti was an Alpha. John Gotti also went to jail too. Genovese was a Sigma. You barely know who he was. He was behind the scenes most of his life, most of his time as a boss. And then when they eventually did catch up to him, they were never able to put him in jail. They were never able to put him in jail. He basically spent the rest of his life out on the streets. There's also other mob bosses that actually were to escape it and fake like they were crazy so they can get out of actually going to jail and shit like that. And they've actually avoided jail. That's typically what Sigmas do. They're smart enough not to be out in the open like Alphas and always want the limelight and the attention. Is typically how they work. They pretty much stay behind the scenes and make sure shit works and everybody else pretty much handles everything around them for the most part. That's typically how Sigmas actually work. The sad part about Alphas is when an Alpha's a mob boss, they want everybody to know they're the mob boss. They want to know everybody to know what they rolled up in, what they got, what they're doing at this time, what party they're having, what party they're going to be at, what party they're going to grace themselves with. That's typically an Alpha for all intents and purposes. So Alphas tend to be more predictable than Sigmas. A Sigma's the type of person that will show up at a party and be like, a Sigma's the type of person, if you ask him to come to a party, he'll say something to the extent of, I'll try to make a guest appearance. That's typically my favorite line when people ask me to come by or stop through. I'll try to make a guest appearance. And it depends on where I'm at or what's going on with my day, where I may stop through for a hot second, then just dip right out for the most part. I'll stop in, say hi, wave to a couple people, drink a drink, and bounce, basically. It's typically how that works. So I limit my time in places like that. The difference between how a Sigma actually gets girls and an Alpha, if you're dating, that is, the difference between how a Sigma approaches women and how an Alpha approaches women is two totally different ways. An Alpha basically goes over all bombastic, trying to flaunt his stuff, strutting his stuff, trying to look all cool or shit like that, trying to be dressed in the latest, greatest shit. Typically, your pop characters for the most part, and they go over and they holler at women. Is typically how it works. A Sigma, on the other hand, when he talks to a woman, he does it like it's surgery, like it's a surgical extraction. Typically, is how it works. Yeah, that's typically what it is. It's about me, me, me. With a Sigma, if he wants to talk to a girl, he basically approaches a woman and gets what he needs to do like it's a surgical extraction. So that nigga slides in, handles what he needs to, and slides out. That's typically what it is. So like he's not gonna be over there trying to, make friends with everybody, trying to, buy everybody around the drinks, trying to get all this extra shit, trying to get the party started. A Sigma's basically gonna slide in there say what's up to the chick, this, that, and the other, collect what he needs to collect, and slide right out, basically. That's typically how he works. Slide in and slide out. Get in and get out, basically. He's basically like SEAL Team 6. Get in, get what you came for, and get the fuck up out of there, basically, is a Sigma. Whereas an Alpha, I'm here, look, it's me. Everybody check out me. It's all me. It's about me. I'm the Alpha here. Big Alpha in the room. Big dog in the room. Look at me. Everybody look at me. That's typically what an Alpha is. He's all about attention. And he's all about attention seeking. And the sad part about that is, like I say about Alphas, is an Alpha is only an Alpha as long as everybody's paying attention and can confirm that he's actually an Alpha. The minute everybody stops paying attention to that person, he's no longer an Alpha. He's now beta. That's typically how that works. And the sad part about that is we always talk about how Alphas are so great and how Alphas are so good, when in fact Alpha's whole entire identity is based on the fact that everybody actually sees them as an Alpha. That's typically how that works. He's only an Alpha to the streets. Because the sad part about that, because everybody sees him, everybody notices him, and basically he's out there in the streets. So basically, as long as the streets is paying attention to him, he'll be an Alpha. The minute the streets stop paying attention to him, or stop bumping him, or stop listening to him, or stop remotely paying him any mind, or stop thinking about him, he's no longer an Alpha, and he basically fades into obscurity. It's typically how it works. So basically, an Alpha is an Alpha as long as the streets is paying attention to his ass. The minute the streets stop paying attention to his ass, he's no longer an Alpha. That's typically how that works. Whereas a Sigma, basically, he's always going to be a Sigma no matter what's going on, no matter how much of a threat is going on, no matter how many people are waiting outside the door, no matter how many people are around him, no matter how many things is going on. He's always going to be a Sigma no matter what. That's the neat thing about Sigmas. They're always going to be a Sigma no matter what. And the funny thing about Alphas that a lot of people like to sweep under the rug is there's a lot of times where Alphas actually succumb, and the Beta, like I was saying in one video, the Beta basically, because he's more knowledgeable in his area, he becomes the go-to guy. So now he becomes the Alpha in that situation. Because at the end of the day, what people fail to realize is being an Alpha is situational. You can't be an Alpha across the board for every fucking thing. You can only be an Alpha in certain areas. You're not going to be a jack of all trades Alpha. There's no such thing as a jack of all trades Alpha. That's typically how that works. You can't be a jack of all trades Alpha. However, this neat thing about betas is I have seen betas actually become Alphas in certain situations where the Alpha didn't have any skills in that, or didn't have a nice skill set for that typical area, is usually how it works. So now the Alpha had to basically take a backseat to the Beta, who actually now becomes the Alpha, because being an Alpha is situational. That's typically how that works. You can't, like I said, there's no such thing as a jack of all trades Alpha. There's just not. Because you're not going to be able to be an Alpha across the board for everything. You're only going to be an Alpha in, let's just say a good example of that is if you're a basketball player, you're only going to be an Alpha in basketball. If you're a football player, you're going to be an Alpha in football. Unless you're Bo Jackson, then you're an Alpha in football and baseball. That's typically how it works. So everything's situational, but you've never seen Bo Jackson dunk in a basketball, because that's just not happening. He won't be an Alpha in basketball. That's typically how that works. And the sad part about that is that's typically the life of an Alpha. He's only an Alpha in certain situations that actually suits him. If it doesn't suit him, he's not an Alpha. Whereas I've seen betas where shit didn't suit them the whole entire time, but the minute they get their chance, them niggas rise up and they're there, and now they're the Alpha. Now they're the big dog in the room for the most part. But the funny thing about that is because that person's now getting the attention, the Alpha now feels threatened, and he always tries to belittle the Beta for the most part, so he can actually try to push him back down to where he wants him to be, so he won't be able to like ever shine on him again, basically. And that's typically how that works. Alpha's spot is always threatened by a very knowledgeable Beta, or by very knowledgeable Betas, a Sigma, or another Alpha. That's typically how that works. A Sigma's worst enemy or worst threat is himself. That's the only thing that plagues a Sigma, is himself. If he didn't learn something, if he didn't take the necessary tools to actually study something, and now he's stuck in a predicament for the most part. And that's typically how that works. And when it comes down to it, the difference between alpha and sigma dating is alphas basically have to be assholes, whereas sigmas seem like they're assholes when they're really not. Because at the end of the day, what happens with that is the difference between an alpha is going to show up at all the major parties. An alpha is just going to do that. A sigma might show up at all the major parties, and he may show up at any part if he shows up at any party at all itself. That's typically how it works. A sigma may show up. Like I said, I'm the type of person that'll tell you I'll try to make a guest appearance. That's typically how that works. So a sigma is going to show up if it benefits him. If it doesn't benefit him, he's not showing up. That's typically how a sigma, and the neat thing about a sigma, when he gets to a party, he's basically the guy that'll get there and then be ready to leave because he pretty much has other things that he would rather do with his time than sit here all night, get drunk and plastered and act stupid with a bunch of people. That's typically what it is. So a sigma basically gets in, lets everybody know he's here, and he bounces basically, or he gets in, he comes for what he basically comes for what he came for, and he gets the fuck out of there, basically. That's typically how that works. A sigma doesn't stick around for long periods of time unless it benefits them to stick around for long periods of time. And most of the times it never really benefits them. So a sigma always has something that he would much rather do. So typically when you're talking to a sigma, he's usually very nonchalant or very stoic or very nonchalant, or he always seems like he's preoccupied because he has other things that he would much rather be doing than what he's doing now. That's typically how it works. Whereas an alpha wants to be the life of the party no matter where the party is. He always wants to be the party for the most part. He always wants everybody paying attention to him, and he always wants to act the fool so everybody can pay attention to him, and everybody can pretty much talk about him the next day for days to come. Because an alpha is basically selfish. And like we were saying earlier, it's all about him. Me, 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 me. Look at me. Check me out. It's my party. I'm the life of the party. It's me. It's all about me. Me, me, me. That's typically an alpha for you. Whereas a sigma, he goes, yeah, whatever. And he basically just bounces. And the sad part about that is sigmas are always a thorn in alpha's side because even alphas can't get sigmas to stay at their party. That's typically how that works. Alphas can't even get a sigma to stay at their party. Like I said, the only way a sigma is going to stay at an alpha's party unless it benefits them. That's typically how that works. Only way an alpha is going to stay at a party unless it benefits him. If it doesn't benefit him, he's going to take the first opportunity to bow out. And 9 times out of 10, he's not going to make a big fuss about it. He's not going to say, deuces my niggas and be out, basically. He's just going to just slide right out while everybody's looking the other way. That's typically how that works. Because the neat thing about sigmas is that's a part of their whole entire persona and their whole entire personality. They basically come in unseen, then everybody notices them, then everybody wants to talk to them, then, the conversation goes on, and then next thing you know, while you're in the middle of a conversation reminiscing, he done bounced like he Batman and shit like that. Nigga done did a ninja vanish on your ass, in the middle of the conversation and shit like that. Or he'll say, I'm going to the bathroom. Meanwhile, he just bounced. Typically, it's how it works. If a sigma tells you he's going to the bathroom or a sigma says, I'll be right back, he's not coming back. He's typically not coming back. He's making an excuse so everybody thinks he's coming back, and he doesn't just come back for the most part. It's typically how it works. Or sometimes he doesn't say anything at all, and he just rolls. Because sigmas usually try to avoid the whole entire people, talking to him, trying to convince him to stay for the most part. So he'll basically just pull a ninja vanish on you for the most part and just get in and out real quick. It's typically how that works. And like Sigma said in his one comment here, alphas alphas pretty much use people for their own success. It's typically how it works. So they basically use people for their own success, whereas a sigma basically shares the success with the people that he actually works with. And the neat thing about sigmas are they're actually very good team players. They're the type of people that'll work in a team and you wouldn't even know they're the boss. If they were the leader, they would basically be working in a team. You would never know that they were actually the team leader. They tend to fly under the radar that much for all intents and purposes. Like if you go to an orchard and you're trying to look for the owner of the orchard, 9 times out of 10, the owner of the orchard, if he's a Sigma, is up in a tree with his coworker with his employees, pulling apples out the damn tree or pulling oranges out the damn tree. Is typically how, or orange grove. If it's orange grove or orchard, he's basically up in the trees with his employees, basically pulling apples or oranges out of the tree too. It's typically how that works because that's basically how Sigmas are. They basically like to learn. They basically like to learn. If they are in charge, they like to learn what their employees are going through so they can get a better understanding for it, so they can make it a better work environment for their employees. That's typically how Sigmas work if they're in charge. They basically work in the fields or work in the streets or work out there in the lines with their employees so they can make sure they're being everything is proper and their employees are being treated properly or being taken care of, well taken care of. If there's not like something that their employees didn't come to them with that they might have missed and didn't mention, he basically works in there so he can basically improve the processes of their jobs or the standing operating procedures of their jobs so he can make it more streamlined and make it better. Is typically how that works. So a Sigma 9 times out of 10, if your boss is a Sigma, 9 times out of 10, there's a high chance he did your job and other jobs in that whole entire operation or entire company. It's typically how it works because he's willing to learn and he's willing to roll up his sleeves and dig in for the most part. Whereas an alpha basically hires a bunch of other people to basically make sure you get the job done, and he tries to do as little work as humanly possible while looking the most successful out of everybody as much as humanly possible. Typically how that works. Like, or if you go to a bar that don't have any windows, or a bar that has a bathroom in the basement, you tend to like just walk out the door, especially if it's near the door. You go to the bathroom and you just walk out the door after you done paid your tab, basically. That's typically how you do it. Because if the bathroom, the stairwell to the bathroom is by the door, you basically just sneak out the door. That's usually how I do it. But yeah, basically a Sigma basically if a Sigma is a leader, he basically works to benefit the group in general, whereas the Alpha basically works to benefit itself and get itself as little work as humanly possible. Is typically how that works. But he's willing to talk shit. But I'm willing to bet any money he doesn't know how to do your job to save his life. Whereas a Sigma, he actually knows your job. He knows the person next to you's job. He knows clearing accounting's job. He knows billing finance's job. He knows TED and Foundation's job. He knows billing the refinery's job. Whereas an Alpha, he couldn't even begin to tell you about your damn job. That's typically how it works. And most alphas come from one area. If not, a lot of alphas actually come from outside the company and become alphas. So they couldn't even tell you anything about the fucking company or how it actually operates and the process leading up to the finished product for the most part. They could care less about that. All they know is it's money that they're making. That's typically how that works. And the funny thing about that is something I always notice about alphas when they do alphas, and the difference between alphas and sigmas is, as I was saying before, an alpha's worst enemy or a alpha's worst adversary is betas trying to come up, another alpha, or a sigma. A sigma's worst adversary, like I said, is himself. That's typically how that works. A sigma's worst adversary is himself. A good example of a sigma handling things properly is, like, basically, if you've ever noticed, like, there's a lot of content creators. They're always doing shit. They're always getting into shit. They're always, channels are getting struck down. shit is happening over there, shit is happening over here, and shit is going on. And if you ever notice, me, I've always stayed consistent, and no matter what was thrown at me, I always came out of it unscathed. That's typically a Sigma for you. No matter no matter how much shit is falling down around the Sigma, let it be on fire, let it be gasoline, let it be explosives, let it be gunshots, let it be anything. A Sigma always walks out of something with little with unscathed to with to little harm to unscathed for the most part. Is typically how it works. What's up, True Sherm? And that's basically a Sigma for you. He basically will walk out of the situation unscathed to a little to very little minor damage taken to him. Whereas an Alpha, if somebody throws a lot of shit at him, everything's going to come around him and he's going to be destroyed. And now he's got to sit up there and rebuild again for the most part. And that's typically how it works. A Sigma basically comes out merely very very rarely scathed, or very little no scathed. Like he basically comes out like shit ain't happened to him. Whereas an Alpha, basically, when shit falls down around an Alpha, it's pretty much the end of him, and now he's got to rebuild. That's typically the difference between a Sigma and Alpha. So an Alpha always has to rebuild, where a Sigma basically comes out like, interesting. Basically brushes his shoulders off and goes on about his merry way. Whereas an Alpha, a Sigma basically comes out and brushes his shoulders off out of all the rubble, and he looks like he's unharmed or unscathed. And an Alpha basically comes crawling out of the wreckage, heals for a little bit, gotta heal his pride and his ego and all this other great shit. Then he goes back to rebuilding all over again. Whereas a Sigma never has to rebuild, for the fact that whatever he got going on around him was never destroyed, because he's not in a structure to be destroyed in the first damn place. Even if he's in a structure that got destroyed, 9 times out of 10, the Sigma is always going to walk out of there unscathed, and the Alpha is always going to take the brunt of the damage. Betas tend to run, so Betas tend to get out of there too very quickly. Some get injured, some don't, and that's typically how that works when it comes to Sigmas and Alphas. A Sigma, when shit collapses around him, when shit collapses around him, he walks out unscathed to very minor injuries, to like unscathed. When everything collapses around an Alpha, he's pretty much destroyed, and he got to start over from scratch. That's typically how that works. He's destroyed, and now you got to start over from scratch. That's why you always hear them comeback stories with people making those comebacks. The problem with having to make a comeback is never put yourself in a position where you have to make that comeback in the first damn place. That's typically how that works. But a lot of people get caught up in trying to be an Alpha and don't pay attention to their bases or their corners. So when shit starts collapsing around them, they got to start all over from square one. Whereas everything collapses around a Sigma, he basically starts where he is. He basically either starts where he is or just one below, a notch below where he started, where he was for the most part, and he never really walks out. He pretty much takes matter to no damage for the most part. It'd be like the difference between walking into a burning building with a fire retardant blanket, and running into a building to save somebody's life without anything, because you want to be the hero. That's typically how it is. What's up, Blind Assassin? True Sherm in the house. Sigma E in the house, obviously. Blind Assassin in the house. But typically that's how things like that work. That's how the general nature of everything operates, for all intents and purposes. Because a Sigma basically will always walk out of something unscathed or unharmed, whereas an Alpha will pretty much be destroyed, completely destroyed. If shit just crumbles around them, they're destroyed. That's typically how a lot of these organized crimes, criminal organizations basically just collapse to nothing. Then they basically got to start all over from scratch again. It's typically how it works. Or they take like a major hit, and now they got to rebuild that section or that sector. They got to rebuild that sector basically, and it's typically how it works. And a lot of people run into this problem when they have like people that want to be showboating in charge and shit like that, and now they got to rebuild and hide in the shadows and rebuild their empire all over again because they had a couple hotheads that did some stupid shit. It's typically how it works. And yes, alphas do treat people like craps. Um, it pretty much is what it is. It comes with their territory. Like I said, alphas are jerks or assholes, whereas sigmas seem or appear to be assholes when in fact they're really not. Because in a characteristic that makes sigmas seem like they're assholes is, like I said, when it comes to, like, I'll try to make a guest appearance and they don't show up, or they show up and they disappear on you. People tend to think they're assholes when they're really not. They just have better things to do, or they probably had a list of things that they probably needed to do or wanted to do. That's typically how that works. So people perceive sigmas as assholes for this reason, because either they won't show up, or they'll show up for very little. They'll show up for very little to no time, basically, and they'll get the hell up out of there without even saying bye. So a lot of people think sigmas are jerks or assholes for this reason, because they basically come in, get what they needed to get, or chilled as long as they needed to chill, and they get the hell up out of there. And the sad part, and the neat thing about a sigma is, sigmas are cool for the fact that they always seem like they have something else better to do, or they always have something that they possibly to be doing on their list of things to do. So they're always in a hurry to get up out of somewhere for the most part. And that's typically how it works when it comes to sigmas. They're always in a hurry to get out. Whereas alphas, they just want to stay there as long as humanly possible. And they want the world to notice them, and they want everybody to praise them and be around them, and they want all the attention, admiration, and praise. That's pretty much an alpha. Whereas a sigma, he basically just goes in, says what's up to everybody, everybody says what's up to him, and he basically bounces. That's pretty much what it is. But I guess I'll open the floor to Q&A. If anybody's in here still, anybody want to ask any questions about sigmas and alphas? You can even throw in their betas, omegas, gammas, all these other things too, if you want to. Anybody got any questions? Yes, no, maybe so. Yeah, we are very careful when it comes to things, and this is why, like, a lot of times when you see me embroiled in some shit, or people flinging mud at me, or people slinging hate at me, basically, I always walk out of it unscathed or unbothered by the shit. That's typically how it works. Like, the shit ain't even going on around me. And that's pretty much what you got to do when it comes down to it. As a sigma, you basically just either ignore it or just walk away from it. The neat thing about alphas, I've noticed, is, like I was saying, alphas could get dethroned by either other sigmas, other alphas, or betas looking to make a come up, which is actually pretty interesting. Zetas? Zetas aren't really bad per se. Zetas actually are able to ignore all the shit around them and not put themselves in things that they don't need to be in. Zetas are actually pretty nice. They're actually a pretty nice group of people. They tend to be those people that can see some shit going down, and instead of getting involved, they'll just get up and walk out. It was basically like what I said about those two middle-aged men on the subway when that woman was being attacked by the crazy guy. They basically seen what was going on. They got up and they moved to another car. That pretty much would be your Zetas. They basically just check out from the world around them and don't want to be bothered. They don't even want to be bothered with bullshit, basically. But the neat thing about Zetas is they're very intelligent, and they tend to keep to themselves unless they have to get involved in some shit. And typically they don't get involved in shit if they don't have to get involved in shit, which is actually pretty nice when it comes to Zetas. Zetas are actually really nice for that reason, because they're able to. A Zeta can actually literally watch some horrific shit go down and go, huh, interesting, and move right along. A Zeta can literally watch some horrific shit go down and just shrug their shoulders and go, well, wasn't me, and just walk out the door. That's the neat thing about Zetas. Zetas are lovely for that reason. Zeta is basically a good personality that you want to have when you have trolls at your door or trolls at your neck or people always trolling you on social media or in public. You basically just want to be a Zeta. Or, if somebody is too high on, if women are get too high and mighty and think that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, you typically want to be a Zeta when shit goes down. You don't want to be a white knight. You want to be the Zeta in a room basically and just want to walk out the room and laugh. And half the time, Zetas don't even laugh. They just walk out. They look at it, assess it, and just walk. That's typically how it is. And they're pretty much impartial. They're very impartial or indifferent. That's the neat thing about Zetas. Gammas tend to be, well, the thing about Zetas is they all have bad personalities, no matter how you look at it. Every single last one of them, no, every single last one of the alphabets have a bad personality or a bad characteristic that basically explains them for the most part. Um, gammas tend to be gammas tend to be like a good example of a gamma in life would be the Hulk. When you take both his personalities, both Bruce Banner and the Hulk, he'd be the perfect gamma for all intents and purposes. That'd be the perfect way I could actually describe a gamma for you. The Hulk and Bruce Banner, for all intents and purposes, all wrapped into one body, is basically the perfect gamma. Um, the perfect the perfect Zeta would be a person that pretty much can check out no matter how horrific the situation is or no matter how dangerous the situation is, and just doesn't help people. He pretty much basically he's just fed up with the world and it's like fuck everything, fuck this shit. I ain't got this shit to do. It's all about me. And I'm going through my life and fuck everything around me for the most part. If it has nothing to do with me or if it's not attached to me. It's typically how it works. Um, a delta would be I would say a delta would be a good example of a delta would be Hawkeyes would be a good example of a delta. No, I'm sorry. Hawkeyes will be a beta. A delta would be I can't think of a person right now off the top of my head that a superhero that would actually be a delta. But yeah, that's pretty much an omega tends to be like the smart, nerdy person that every now and again steps in. Like a good thing about the thing about an omega is omegas, omegas, zetas, and sigmas tend to actually get along with each other quite well. The funny thing about it, omega, a zeta, and a sigma is they tend to interact with each other quite well, and they tend to play off each other's strengths and weaknesses very well in a team. So if you have a sigma, omega, and a zeta in a team, they tend to play off each other's strengths and weaknesses very well, and they tend to mesh very well, and they tend to be a very good team. That's typically how that works. They tend to be a far better team than most other teams. Um, because a sigma is basically going to be good across the board in various things. Where omega would be good for backup and tech. Is a good example of a good omega. They'll be good for like being a backup guy just in case shit goes down, and they're good at tech. They don't really get into like the nitty gritty when it comes to like physical stuff, but they tend to have this ability to have to if they have to get into the nitty gritty, they can. Um, the same thing goes for Zetas. Zetas tend to be very impartial, and they tend to be the ones like a good example of a Zeta would be Shikamaru. Shikamaru Nora. If you ever seen the Naruto anime, he'd be a very good Zeta. He basically always checks out, and he's always one of those things where like, why bother? Oh my god, what a drag! Is always his favorite lines. He's like, basically what a bother or what a drag for the most part is always his favorite line, and he always wants to find a way to get out of doing shit for the most part, in any way, shape, or form. And like a good example of that, he would only fight if his loved ones are involved, or if his loved ones or somebody or people he loved dearly, he will actually step in. But typically, they tend to step out when it comes to everything else for the most part. Like the lady on the subway. If you don't know the lady on the subway, he'll get up and move to another. Oh, what a drag! And he'll get up and move to the back of the damn car for the most part, to another car altogether. And then you have, you know, Shikamaru is a nice. He's always. Shikamaru can also be seen as an Omega also, because he's very intelligent. He's highly intelligent, but like he only uses intelligence when he has to, or he only gets himself into fights when he necessarily has to. It's typically how that works, which makes him more Zeta than anything else. Whereas an Omega, he basically sets everything up to the point where he never has to even take a punch, or even has to or take a swing or take a punch. Basically, it's typically how it works. Whereas a Zeta, basically, it's one of those things where it's like shit just got real, all the shit just hit the fan, and shit's just wrecked around him, and now he basically has to step up. Basically, it's typically how that works. So the neat thing about the Zetas, Omegas, and Sigmas is they tend to mesh very nicely as a team, despite the fact that they all don't really want to be there, and they want to do as little as humanly possible to have to do anything or be there for all intents and purposes. Usually how it works. Sigmas don't really interact with betas too often, or they try to avoid interaction with betas as much as humanly possible if they can. And if there is a good leader who is an alpha, a Sigma will follow that good leader as long as it benefits them. The minute it stops benefiting them, that's when he stops following that leader for the most part. So I can say that about a Sigma. A Sigma will follow a good alpha leader if he's but he has to be a flawless alpha leader for him to want to follow them. The minute following that alpha leader stops benefiting a Sigma, he's basically out, or he done bounce for all intents and purposes. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, comment, subscribe to me if you see my channel. I pretty much post all types of content on here. Subscriber requests lately, but I basically do red pill content, subscriber request shit, no matter what the fucking topic is. Or requests for videos. If you want me to do a request for video, I basically just do it. Just hit me up in the email link that will be in this video by the time it uploads, or hit me up at on Discord. If you're in Discord, hit me up at Discord, drop me a question or drop me a request, and I'll pretty much be happy to do the request. This is Sigma. This is Sigma versus Alphas. Sigmas versus Alphas. Sigmas win. If I have anything else, I'll make a part 2 to this, and it won't be a part of the subscriber request videos. It'll be his own standalone video for the most part, but it'll be a part 2. But yeah, y'all have a good one. Thank you, Sigma. Y'all have a good one. Be blessed. Take care of yourselves, better yourselves, and always improve yourselves. Ignore the trolls. Don't feed the trolls. Fuck the trolls. And treat yourselves like milk. Do nothing but spoil yourselves. Y'all be good, be blessed, and have a great day. Adios, my niggas.